The audio project with Deena Tearney goes on the road. Hope you enjoy today's chat that was recorded from our Sydney, Australia office. Let's jump into today's podcast. Sam, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so I have to tell you, I'll never forget the first time I met you, which was over a year ago. We met through Cub. And you don't know this because we were on the phone, but I was frantically taking notes the entire time for in that first meeting that I had with you.
Yeah.
And definitely you're someone who I would say is very knowledgeable on the Salesforce Talent ecosystem in Sydney, and probably beyond, but certainly from my perspective, the questions that I had, I remember you were just a wealth of information. I was just getting it all down. So thanks for being here. And maybe for our audience, if you can, and by the way, also thanks for coming to our freshly minted office here. We just moved into this particular room in March, so we're just getting situated. So thanks for coming over. But for our audience, if you wouldn't mind just giving an introduction in terms of your name and what you are responsible for, what you do.
Yeah, so my name is Sam Smeaton. I am the founder and CEO of nVision Talent. So we are a specialist talent agency focused on new and emerging technology ecosystems. Salesforce is a huge part of that, and it's an ecosystem that I've been involved with since late 2010, early 2011, which is essentially when I first started getting into recruitment. So it's been quite a while, quite a journey, and we've diversified since then. So we've got a few other kind of core areas that we focus on, but Salesforce and all things cloud is really our core focus, and something that I'm really passionate about.
Cool. Now tell me a little bit of the story that got you to this point. It's your company, right? So tell me your background and what got you to the point of the company of nVision.
Yeah, so I initially worked for a recruitment agency. Like I said, late 2010 is when I first started, and I worked for a technology recruiting agency. When I first started my career, I was actually doing a lot of SAP and Oracle and a lot of Siebel recruitment as well back then. Salesforce, at least here, was still relatively unheard of, and there was really hardly any candidates at that time. But I got a few requirements, Salesforce specific requirements, and really started to look into Salesforce as a company and kind of where they were going, and I guess looking at them as a market disruptor, and really saw the potential of them as a vendor, and then obviously the flow and effect to the consultancies and the ISVs. And it was just, I think the timing was right to really focus on that as a niche and focus on that as an area, because at least back then there was really no one else in Australia focusing on that. I remember my sales director at the time said, it's too small, you can't just do Salesforce, you've got to, you can't put all your eggs in one basket. And I kind of wanted to do that, and although it was quite new and emerging back then, obviously, I guess in hindsight it was the right decision to do that. Sure. But yeah, so that's kind of how I got into it, really. I started on some similar technologies and really saw it coming as an opportunity, and just decided to really focus on that exclusively, which was good. And nearly 10 years later,
that's crazy. Yeah, it's crazy. I'm curious, just for my own edification, from the time you started, how have you seen the requests change over time? So at first people were just coming to you for what kind of roles, and sort of how has that evolved over the last 10 years?
Yeah, so if I remember back to those days, it was really just about finding anyone with Salesforce to begin with. There was there was a few people back then that were really cross-skilling, especially from Siebel. And Siebel was still, there was still a lot going on, especially in the telcos and the government space, and the FinServ. There was a lot of projects, but Salesforce at the same time was kind of ramping up, and candidates were recognizing that and starting to really cross-train and cross-skill themselves. I think the initial requirements, at least from my point of view, was really on the admin side. So people with strong platform experience, people that are really good at configuration and all the point and click side of it, from a functional point of view, and then you had the developer side, right, which is, you know, Apex and Visual Force, and back then that was pretty much it. You know, that was the requirement.
Yeah.
Like, there was no Lightning or any of that. So it was really...
That's true. It's probably gotten more complicated in terms of the skill level. Okay, so sorry, go ahead.
Well, it was really just, it was kind of in two baskets. It was really that functional side and that technical side, and that was it. And so a lot of the recruiting I was doing was, you know, the functional consultants and then the developers, and then you had the administrators, right, that were, you know, keeping the engine running and making sure things are ticking along nicely for customers, and that was it. Like, it was really narrow, I guess, but it was really hard to find people with any skill set whatsoever,
really?
Let alone the certifications. And I can't remember exactly, but back then I think, you know, you had the admin certification, and I think you had the developer certification, but, you know, you certainly didn't have the 20 plus that we have now, right?
Yeah.
So that was the challenge, back then, for sure.
Back then, and then, like, how is it transitioned?
Yeah. Well,
I mean, I guess what I'm getting at too, in part, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on it, is like how companies, was it this influx of more and more companies purchasing it? Was it then like consulting firms coming to the mix? Like, what were the factors, and then like how did that sort of start to evolve here?
Yeah, it was really, it was customers purchasing. You know, it was initially purchasing licenses. A lot of the project work was being done by the partners, which, you know, very much still is like that, I guess. Probably on a lot smaller scale back then. I think in terms of the skill set now, it's pretty wide. And what I'm finding, or what I found, I think one of the biggest differences is that the requirements, people want a broader skill set, you know, and so it's not just about, are you a developer or can you code, or are you a functional consultant, therefore are you good on the BA side and config side. It's like clients want the full kind of breadth of, you know, they want you to be kind of an end-to-end consultant, so you need to have really strong BA skills, you need to be strong on the platform, you might need to do some project management depending on how big, you know, the implementation is. I think Salesforce, as you know, it's one of those ecosystems where you need to wear a lot of hats depending on the project size. It's probably a little bit more complicated on the developer side because you've had so many new releases over, you know, especially the last 10 years, is that at the moment, you know, it's, you know, Lightning is kind of the hot thing, and I think requirements wise for us, it's clients were really looking at developers with strong Lightning Web Component experience, and it's not just about the Apex and the Visual Force side anymore. Which, you know, it's challenging because the candidates are only going to have that skill set if they're given the opportunity, you know, by their employer. So it's a tricky one. So the requirements are, I think, kind of wider in that sense. And I think from my point of view, it's a bit of an education piece when I'm speaking with customers, especially if they don't have that internal capability and they don't necessarily know a lot about Salesforce. You know, they don't know what they don't know, I guess. And sometimes, you know, it's just an education thing to say, look, there isn't one person that is an expert on Marketing Cloud, an expert on sales service,
the magic person
that can code, you know, that can actually speak to stakeholders. Like it just doesn't exist. It's like three or four different roles. So I think that's a part of my job, is just to kind of do that education piece and really just help clients out and help customers understand that these are the skill sets. Like this is what you'll find. It's not, you know, this particular unicorn just doesn't exist. And if they do, they're definitely out of your budget.
Exactly.
So,
Yeah, for sure. So I'm curious, with people, when you first got into it and there were people that were coming to the table transitioning from Siebel to Salesforce, their companies made the change and then they were gaining the experience, or was it more like I had the skill, or, you know, if you had Siebel and then you were trying to find another opportunity knowing the market was heading that way, or what was the dynamic?
It was primarily people wanting to transition and move away from Siebel. So, you know, companies back then, and I guess even now, we're really open to candidates from a strong CRM background, right? Because it's obviously very transferable. It's just a different platform that they can get skilled up on. So there was a lot of candidates, you know, coming from, like I said, FinServ or government or telco, either working directly or through consulting partners that really were keeping an eye on Salesforce. They were doing their certifications, you know, back then, but they didn't really have any practical project experience.
Right. Okay.
But they were very keen, you know, and therefore they're willing to, you know, take a bit of a sacrifice and in order to get upskilled. And, you know, I think for a lot of people back then that did it, it obviously paid off, you know.
Absolutely.
It was a good decision.
It's weird to talk about that because, well, a couple different things. First of all, I'm not going to say what year it was, but when I did Siebel trainings, this was my first time kind of jumping into this CRM space, and I did Siebel training. I'll never forget. I was living in Dallas, Texas. The trainer came out, and he had been training a lot of people in Sydney. I mean, like, I remember Siebel was big here.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like it might have even been earlier adoption than what I recall, at least in Texas, where I was from. I mean, so I remember he was like, oh my God, it's blowing up over there. I just got through all these training sessions, and then he flew in and did our training.
Yeah, right.
So I thought that was kind of I've just remembered that when you were talking about Siebel and people here.
Yeah.
The other thing I noticed was, like, this is just a really weird tangent that I'm on right now, but I was just thinking about, there were some Siebel people in the U.S. that I recall coming from that background thinking, I'm not going to learn Salesforce right yet. And that's why I was asking you, did they, you know, were the people going like, hey, I better jump on this bandwagon, even though there's plenty of still clients that have these complex implementations of Siebel. But from a skill perspective, recognizing they better make a change, you know, like, 'cause I definitely saw both camps, and I would say much more sticking with the old, just because that was like, how long are they going to take to get off? They're going to need me for a long time, you know, and just kind of riding the bandwagon as long as they possibly could. Did you,
there was an element of that, and I guess one reason would be is that, you know, especially people that have been in that Siebel kind of space for a long time, you know, they were really senior and experienced people, right? And a lot of the time they'd be contracting, or they would be in a permanent role, and they were kind of at the top of their game, and therefore, you know, they're on good salaries, right? Because they've been doing that for so many years, and so think jumping ship into a new technology ecosystem, it's in some ways it's kind of starting from scratch, but again, it doesn't take long, I don't think, to cross train and get skilled up. And I've seen a lot of people do it. I've placed a lot of people that came from that Siebel background. And
the Siebel guys are the best, right?
Yeah.
Okay, good. You just had to say that, so it made me feel good.
No, they are.
It's actually true. I mean, I feel like when I have someone that comes through, and actually some of the guys on my team are former, you know, people that I used to work with doing that. Because it is, I mean, actually it was more complex.
Yeah.
So moving into Salesforce, you're just like, oh my God, it's all here. It's all like easier and much easier to deal with.
Yeah.
Okay, so good. Thank
so
you.
there was an element of, I guess, people being a bit reluctant and hesitant, right? Because they're comfortable, and it's kind of like going into the unknown. And like you say, the projects were huge, and it's not just about the project work. There's obviously a lot of BAU for years to come after that, right? And if they're on a good day rate and they kind of know what they're doing, it's fairly easy. Like it's going to take a lot for someone to just jump ship into the unknown, but sooner or later, I think everyone kind of had to do that, right?
And it was like the Siebel projects were huge, and the Salesforce ones, at least in the early days, were, you know, you're on super short projects, and I think there's an element of like, that's not a real thing yet.
Yeah.
You know, so.
Especially on the contracting side, you know, I found Siebel contracts, you know, 6 to 12 months, 12 plus months pretty easily, and then Salesforce, it's kind of like 3 months. If you're getting longer than that was really good. But like you say, it's a pretty quick turnaround depending on the project, at least back then,
At least
right?
back then, yeah. Now it's definitely a different scene. It's kind of all over the place, at least from what I've seen. What would you say are maybe, from your perspective, what's, you know, more speaking maybe from an audience perspective to the individual, so what's the candidate, if you will, like what would you say are maybe the top few things that are the highest in demand as it relates to Salesforce talent in general?
At the moment, for at least the last couple of years, from what I've seen, if you're a developer, it's really lightning, and getting that lightning web component experience is huge. I think it constantly comes up, and it's a bit of a roadblock to candidates that don't have that, although they are amazing developers and they have been developers for 5, 6, 8+ years. If they don't have that particular skill set, they're not progressing, they're not moving forward. So I think from a development point of view, that is super important. I think from a functional point of view, at least these days, having somewhat of a cross-cloud capability is really important. And like I said, when we were looking, 8 or 9 years ago, it was just a matter of having that Salesforce CRM experience, right? Because that's essentially all Salesforce was back then. It was really just a CRM component, and it's obviously so much more now. There's so many more products. So I think it's about, having that core, sales and service cloud experience, but then also, trying to get involved in marketing cloud projects, or trying to get involved in, CPQ projects, and having just, I guess, a broader skill set,
right?
Especially as a, what we would term a functional consultant or a Salesforce consultant. It's not enough just to know sales and service, and that's it. I think the broader you go, you're going to have more opportunities.
Right.
There's obviously a lot more Salesforce people out now, in the ecosystem, and there's more competition from a candidate point of view. And if you're kind of pigeonholing yourself too much, I think you're going to get left behind. You really need that broader skill set. But you need to know enough that you're not just diluting yourself. So it's a bit of a fine line, I guess, of staying relevant, staying on top of the certifications, staying on top of that platform experience, but looking at what else, clients are doing, whether it's, like I said, the CPQ side, velocity as an example has been huge the last couple of years, and clients are really looking at that. And I'm not sure how it is in the States, but there's few and far between. From a skill set point of view, it's really hard to find, candidates with that skill set.
Right.
But it's in demand. So if I was a consultant, I would be trying to upskill on, looking at the biggest projects that have happened wherever, if we're here in Australia, so looking at some of the larger implementations and actually what went on in that implementation and what products were implemented, and really trying to upskill myself on those products. That's what I would be.
So from the candidate's perspective, just based on what you just now said, if I wanted to learn, and by the way, specific point, we do lightning components, we do a lot of that work for our customers, we do velocity work, we're a velocity partner, but I'm just wondering, like, from a candidate's perspective, wanting to skill up on those things, are you finding that you can do the trainings and all that, but getting the actual experience is what's valuable? Are you finding that customers here, your clients at least, are they giving those people those opportunities to experience. Kind of, or are they kind of like, okay, get the training done and then we'll see, or what's the vibe on that?
I think it's a bit hit and miss, to be completely honest, because depending on the size of the project, sometimes I find that people will just be put on site for a period of, 12 months or 18 months. And that's one of the biggest reasons people are looking to leave. And at least in my experience, is because they want more exposure. They want more industry experience, not just from a product point of view, but also from an industry. I think generally people join consulting to have that variety and to be able to work on different projects in different industries. So, I think that's one of the biggest reasons that people are kind of looking, is because they're getting pigeonholed onto these huge projects into one particular area, and they can't really go anywhere. They're kind of stuck there, because it is such a huge project. So, going back to the question, some are getting that opportunity and that practical experience, but others just aren't, because they are getting just pigeonholed on site. So if I was running a consulting company, I think just being conscious that you're not just leaving your consultants on site forever, because they joined a consulting business. They didn't necessarily join direct to that customer.
Yeah, for sure. And are some of your customers and your clients, industry companies as well and organizations, or are you predominantly helping the consulting firms?
No, there's a mixture.
It's a mixture.
Yeah, there's a mixture. Obviously the consulting side is big because the majority of the project work is obviously done by the services partners. You've obviously got the ISV ecosystem as well,
right.
Which is obviously more product, and that's kind of more, at least in Australia, it tends to be more sales focused. I think a lot of the ISVs here, it's a bit of an outpost from the US where the HQ will be,
right.
or potentially Europe. And then obviously you've got the customer side, the direct customer side as well. So there's definitely that mixture, and we kind of do both. So
right.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, it kind of leads me into one of the things that I talk to a lot of our customers about, and I'm just curious from your perspective too, is the importance of investing in the Salesforce talent that you have, whether you be a consulting firm or you be, in my case, I'm working with a lot of our clients and talking to them about how to do this.
Yeah.
Many of our customers don't want to just be solely dependent upon a consulting partner to have sustainment for their systems. And so there's always this conversation about, helping them strategize how best to start investing in people. And maybe it's giving them the opportunity to build a lightning component and, try their hand at that. What do you think, what are your thoughts on like kind of investing in talent and encouraging, whether it be a consulting firm or an industry client to do that?
Yeah. So I have seen from an industry client point of view, at least here, they're quite open to actually training up people internally onto the platform, which is great. There's definitely, like you say, not every client solely wants to rely on that, that partner for everything. Sometimes they want a bit of a blend. They want some kind of, in-house capability. So if they're not going to market and looking to hire, that Salesforce admin or that Salesforce developer, I'm finding that they are kind of training people up, and they're willing to invest and put people through, the certification programs and also just the general Salesforce training programs, and really upskill them, especially if you're a large corporate, it's probably easier because you're going to have a big IT team. You're going to have people that have probably dabbled in Salesforce anyway and have somewhat of an experience, and then you're going to have those internal people that they touch Salesforce and they realize that actually they really like it, and this is the way that they want to go. So they kind of make that transition from whatever their role is in-house into more of a Salesforce champion.
Right.
So I've seen that quite a lot, which is great because it's then developing the local ecosystem even further.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is good.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's good to, with some of our customers, depending on what they're doing with Salesforce, because sometimes they're replacing existing systems. So then they want to transition those people that were maintaining the old legacy systems into maybe exploring whether or not they can manage Salesforce, or they want to skill up for that if they wish.
Yeah.
I think in that, there's different ways, and I think, I guess I wanted to get your thoughts on it, because we've talked to our customers about, maybe bringing on, giving them some assignments. Maybe it's a VAU assignment or something like that, giving them some things to do, but then infusing somewhere along the line someone that has the expertise, and maybe that's where they go and bring on, this unicorn that doesn't really exist, but maybe they bring on some people that have that experience. Yeah. So there's some co-working and are people implementing strategies like that from some of your clients where they're mixing, teams of the experienced guys with the people that they're trying to skill up that may not have that yet? Because I would definitely say that's the better way to go rather than just go out there and figure out Salesforce. I mean, that's a bit much to try to take on and feel confident that your solution's gonna, continue to ride the Salesforce with the Salesforce changes that are gonna continue to come. Yeah. But I'm just, what are your thoughts?
Yeah. I've seen, like you say, I think that's a good way to go, and I've seen it work where a client will, they might bring someone in from external. So it might be for example, Salesforce administrator, or an SME or a Salesforce champion, and they'll bring that person in, and then they'll coincide that with developing their internal capability, and they'll have people sit alongside that champion and kind of learn and cross-train from that person. I think you kind of need that capability to begin with. It's like you say, you can't just go out and learn Salesforce. It doesn't really work that way, and you can do the certifications and the training, but you still need someone that knows kind of what they're doing, and someone that can then kind of cross-train your other internal capabilities. So I've seen that work pretty well, where they might bring in a Salesforce consultant into in-house, and then cross-train their internal staff, and learn from that champion, right? And then continuously develop that capability in-house. So that works pretty well.
That makes sense. So just hearing you talk about it, I'm just curious, what's been some of the just off the wall craziest requests that you've received as a recruiter in this?
Yeah, I'm fortunate that I haven't had anything like mind-blowing, but I guess like going back to the point earlier about these kind of unicorn people out there, there's definitely a lot of education, probably less so these days, just because Salesforce it's a mature market. It's like people generally kind of know the ecosystem a lot of the time, but a few years ago, when it was still quite emerging, I just had a lot of conversations around it's basically 4 or 5 different jobs in one, and you're probably paying half of what you actually need to pay to get that person that you want, and like a lot of the time they're receptive, and they do take advice, and they take advice from someone that has done it for quite a while, especially if they've never it's hard when they've never gone to market and actually gone to resource for a Salesforce person. It doesn't matter if it's an administrator or a developer. A lot of the time you'll see job ads, and they'll want a Salesforce functional consultant that can code and do Apex, and that has 10 certifications and Marketing Cloud and all the bells and whistles, and they're just not paying for it, like it just doesn't exist.
Right.
And if it does exist, typically those people are going to be contracting on really big projects, and they're going to be very expensive, like far more than the client can actually afford. So it happens less so these days, but it's just setting the expectations, because I the last thing I want to do is try and take something on that I know I can't deliver, or that I know just doesn't exist. I'd rather just be upfront and say, I'm not going to be able to deliver. I can't do it.
Good luck with that one, right? You're like, okay, great.
And again, most of the time, they are receptive, and they take on advice and take feedback, and then they might have to kind of tweak the job description, or they might have to make 2 jobs, or
Well, it's funny that you said it, because I remember when and this is a while back, this is definitely many years ago, started Pacific Point, and I was working on a project, and related to that project, there was a need for the client to have some web support, some web development type stuff.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, I'll see what I can do. Maybe I can help you or whatever. Yeah. And then it was like, okay, they have to have the back end, the front end, and they have to be really good at UX. Remember when UX, UI, that whole thing was like a big, big deal? It was several years ago. Yeah. And I remember thinking okay, it's going to be tough to find. But then when I heard the budget, which I'm not even going to say, it was just sort of like, okay, I don't know about that. And I wasn't as nice as you to just say something. I was like, okay, well, I'll see what I can do. And meanwhile, I'm like, right.
Yeah, it's like you basically need a digital agency, like a full digital agency. Not one person. Yeah.
So it's funny that you said that, because I just remembered that story, and recruiting is really, really tough because of that, right? You're solving a bunch of different problems, and I remember at that moment thinking, there's no way I could do this. It's tough. I mean, it really is tough.
Yeah.
But going back to expectation settings, I think, what would you say, when I look at companies that are skilling up on Salesforce, or maybe they're just about to take the plunge, or whatever they're at in their journey, what do you think is a really good expectation setting thing that they should be aware of as they start to build talent for their team? Again, maybe they're just starting their journey, and it's like, you need to have some realistic expectations here. What are those expectations that businesses should have
That's a really
building
good,
their talent?
good question. I find the businesses that have the most realistic expectations are the ones that are working with an implementation partner and are going to them for a lot of advice and actually asking the questions to them around, this is what we're looking for, this is the kind of capability, help us formulate what we need out of that. And a lot of the time they will do that, and then they will come to someone like me, for example, or they'll go to a specialist recruiter, and they're working really closely. They've got that partnership, they're kind of in sync. The implementation partner has set the expectations with the customer understands that. And I find that works quite well. If there's no implementation partner involved, it obviously does make it harder because they're not going to have any internal capability. So I would say they can speak to a dedicated, a specialist recruiter who knows the market and knows the capabilities, knows the different, the roles, budgets, salaries, that type of thing. I mean, that's definitely a good place to start. And I've done a lot of work with customers that I haven't actually worked with, but they've just come to me and said, hey, we're thinking about hiring this person. First of all, do they exist? Yeah. And if they do, how much do they cost?
Right. And then they're like, oh my God.
Yeah.
What have I done?
Yeah. And then they need to go back and get more budget. But that's happened a lot where it's, I haven't necessarily worked with them, but they've just come to me and I'm more than happy to share any advice and any kind of market insights that I can because, overall we want to develop this ecosystem and grow it, right? So either going to someone specialist or working with your implementation partner if you do have one, or speaking to your account exec or speaking to Salesforce if you've got a good relationship there. I think that's a good way to start.
Yeah, I would agree, and it's definitely definitely agree to have someone that is an expert to come in and do it. I think one of the expectations that I talk about, and this is more on the technology side, but as you were talking, I was thinking it sort of applies and building talent as well, is, I tell our customers that, it's not like a one-time cost in Salesforce, right? The power of the platform, it can do so much, but it requires that constant investment. And I think it's the same investment that you put not just in, innovate. Salesforce puts a ton of, investment in the technology, and they're going to come out with all these amazing things. Yeah. But then you've got to kind of invest on your side in the people and the talent to help continue to do that. And it's not just a one-time setup. I've got the consulting team in, they've done their thing, and now I'm just going to kind of maintain. You're going to want to continue to build on the new things that Salesforce comes out with. So investing in the talent, I think, is just hugely important for our customers.
Yeah, for sure. And I've had a lot of experience where customers have had Salesforce, they've bought licenses, they've had it implemented, not necessarily the way they expected, and they've paid all this money and it's like no one's really using it, there's no user adoption. And I did a lot of work, especially last year, by actually helping customers with sort of change managers, sort of program managers, and really going in and kind of sitting in the middle. So you've got the business or the organization, you've got the implementation partner, and they would kind of sit in between and really hold the partner accountable and really do a bit of a health check and kind of question a lot of things. And that it worked quite well, but it's an investment. Like the customer, they're going to have to pay for that, but they spend all this money initially buying it and getting it set up. You need to, like you say, continually invest. It's not just a one-off.
Yeah, that's hugely important. And I was actually going to ask you, if you've seen some clients attempting or working on building out their Salesforce talent, and maybe some good things, some good developments that as you've kept in touch with them over the years, or some maybe lessons learned, I guess we could say. Are there any tips that you might want to share on that topic?
I've seen, in terms of developing talent internally, I think that people can come from a different skill set. So I've seen it work well where you might have a kind of inside salesperson, for example, who's really inside Salesforce day long, and they might be essentially the dedicated Salesforce champion for that particular customer, especially if it's a smaller business. I find that happens a lot. And then that particular person will want to upskill and actually be kind of that official Salesforce administrator.
I love that advice. I love that advice.
And I've seen that happen quite a lot, especially from that kind of inside sales or that sales operations type of role, where they're working really closely with the sales reps and they just live inside Salesforce. I've seen that work really well. And then they progress to be a Salesforce administrator and kind of go down that path. And then from a developer point of view, I've seen it from, especially people coming from a .NET background or maybe a Java background, and really kind of cross-skilling themselves. I think a good developer can cross-skill pretty quickly, the same as a good consultant can. And so I think from a technical side, I've seen that work pretty well. But certainly that kind of sales admin operational type of role I've seen work pretty well.
That makes a lot of sense. On the developer side, I'll say this. So when I first started my career as a software engineer, so I did like straight code, and when I went to Siebel, they were all like, "Oh, are you gonna like it? Because you're so nerdy. Like you have to click stuff, you know." It's like, so. But that's interesting to hear that you've seen some customers have their tech people make that transition to declarative, and there's plenty of, lightning components and all that stuff is still, there's a lot of code in the mix, but you still have to know how it all kind of fits together. But that's really good. That's good to hear. Thanks for the advice. So I have a question of the day for you. What is maybe the number one thing that a company can do to really sell themselves to a candidate who might be making sure that they're painting the right picture of themselves? Because sometimes I feel like companies don't know how to really sell themselves to a potential candidate. Or does it really just come down to compensation and benefits? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
So compensation and benefits are important, but they're not the number one thing. I think it's hard to probably just pick one thing. There's a range of different factors, but
say as much as you want.
Well, at least, so in my experience here, companies that have somewhat of a flexible kind of good work-life balance, right? Especially if we talk about consulting, as you probably know, and you've been consulting for a long time, it's quite easy to get burnt out, especially if you're under-resourced and you've got a bunch of projects on. It can be common to be doing 60, 70 hour plus weeks, right? And that's only going to last for so long. So I think being conscious that you're not burning your people out and making sure that you've got enough resources to actually deliver the projects is super important, and not kind of constantly having people work on the weekends and working all sorts of crazy hours, especially if they've got kids and they've got home life that they need to do. It's only going to last for so long. So I think having that kind of flexible work-life balance is super important, and that can mean different things for different people. It might mean when you're not on a client site, you're able to work from home potentially. And, maybe your hours are kind of different. You need to do the school run in the morning and then pick up the kids at 4 o'clock or whatever in the afternoon. So I see that as a really big selling point for people, and that's obviously nothing to do with compensation or benefits. It's more around that work-life balance, and that's huge. From a technology point of view, people really want to be able to work on, I think, multiple platforms and multiple products. So giving them exposure to, for example, Marketing Cloud or Velocity or other products that kind of tie into the ecosystem to give them that broader exposure that will then obviously help them longer term is super important. Integration is huge at the moment, and we do a lot of work, especially in the MuleSoft space. And we're finding, especially the more technical candidates, they really want that opportunity to work on the integration piece. And so I think being able to offer different technologies and different kind of areas to work across is super important. And then going back to our point earlier about not just pigeonholing people on site for years at a time, because they will just get bored. They will get over it. So being conscious that you're placing people on site, you might have a big project that's going to run for years, but making sure that you swap people out.
Yeah.
You know, I think that's super important as well. So yeah, it's definitely not all about salary. You do have to pay what the market is paying.
Right.
But it's, you know, I've never had a candidate just join a job for a bonus or,
right.
you know, just because they might be getting a little bit more money. You know?
Right.
Again, that's only a short-term fix.
Yeah.
If you're getting a bit more money, but you're actually working way longer hours and you're not getting exposure to the other technologies, then it's a short-term thing.
Yeah, I like the exposure to other technologies. I know a lot of people just over the years where it's like they know, let's say, you know, field service like super duper well.
Yeah.
So then on everything they're just like, you do that. And
Yeah,
they're like,
yeah.
well, I want to do the other stuff too, you know?
Yeah.
And it's tough because you trust their expertise but yet, you know, you've got to kind of develop. It goes back to just investing in people.
Yeah.
And giving people those opportunities. So
Yeah.
I would agree.
And I think, you know, also making sure that you're developing their careers and making sure you've got somewhat of a career path for people, especially people that are pretty new to the ecosystem and they're coming in at more at that junior level, whether they're on the technical side or the more on the functional side. They're going to want to progress and they're going to want to go down the path, whatever that path might be, right? So for the developers and for the technical consultants, that's potentially the architect route that they want to go. So just being conscious that you can maybe pair people up with, you know, your most senior technical people in the business that they can learn from. And then likewise, if you've got a consultant coming into the business, they might want to go down that solution architect path potentially. And so it's just kind of being conscious of that, and that you are developing people's careers and you're willing to invest in their certifications and their training and you know, the learning and development side, I think, is really important.
That's really, really good advice. Cool. Well, thank you, Sam. Thanks for coming.
Nice.
Is there anything else you want to say? I'm going to just say, like, is there anything else that we didn't talk about that you might want to highlight?
No, I think we covered quite a lot.
Yeah, that was good. Yeah, that was some really good tips, I think, even for myself and hopefully for our audience to think about as they go through. So thanks for joining me.
Worries.
It's fun.
Thank you for having me.